Welcome to the show. Now, love, it eludes many. To many others, though, money is the elusive one. If you manage to get a hold of both, you're actually doing pretty well. But that is not the end of the struggle, I'm sure. If you've found a significant other and you two become one, any scarce asset that you have, especially money, can become the focal point of conflict. So it's one thing to talk about investing, but often there's two people involved, right? I'm going to be talking today with two people about love and money. First, we have Donna Robinson, who works with the team at the Commission for Financial Capability. Also, I have Catherine Emerson, former financial advisor, who works with Kernel Wealth. Today, the goal is to discuss some of the reasons why there can be conflict in a relationship with respect to money, and most importantly, how we can turn a weakness into a strength when financial consensus can be achieved at home. I hope you enjoy the show. Now, a quick shout out to our partner, Hatch. I use Hatch exclusively as my broker to access the US share market. And they've recently added the ability also for existing adults to set up kids accounts. Now, this is cool, I think, because, hey kids, sorry you cannot go to Disneyland yet, but at least you can invest in it. Yeah, it's something, right? Now, if you want to check them out, click on the link in the description below. Let's get started on today's show now. Why don't we start with you, Donna? Why don't you tell us who you are and how you fit into this moneyverse?
Kia ora. My name is Donna Robinson, no Waikato Tainui Ahau. I'm from Hamilton. So my role is a lead facilitator for the Commission for Financial Capability. However, I own my own business, Money Sense Financial Education Services. So what I do is essentially help get into the community and help people understand their finances. So I guess I'm preparing people to go and see financial advisors and help them get a grasp of their money behaviors before they start thinking about making some changes, and prepare a budget, set some goals. And yeah, I love what I do. I'm really, really passionate about it as well.
And Kat, you're not new to the NZ Everyday Investor, so people know a little bit about you already, but just for the benefit of those just catching up, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, how you fit into things.
Awesome. Thanks, Darcy. So I'm Kat. I work for an investment platform called Kernel, and I run the marketing and customer strategy team there. So we get to chat to lots of different investors about what they're working towards. My background is actually as a financial advisor. I did that for 8 years based out of Australia, and I've got a lot of experience working with both couples and individuals from both the accumulating stage right through to wealth generation and retirement. So have sat down in a small room with a lot of people, probably hundreds of them, over that period of time, and had a lot of in-depth discussions about how to handle money both as individuals but together. So I'm really excited to share some insights on that today.
Fantastic. That's awesome. And this podcast is all about building wealth for the everyday person. And a lot of people, when they turn their attention towards investing or building wealth, potentially they have kind of the view that, hey, this is my thing, I'm going to run with it. And they kind of sometimes forget a little bit about the fact that there's maybe a significant other with them. And sometimes that's subconscious, sometimes that's on purpose. But I think that it warrants a discussion today just around how important it is to work as a team. And one of the best books that I've read, and I know that many people have read, is The Barefoot Investor by Scott Pape. And it's awesome because it sets out a really simple, it's prescriptive, but it sets out a really simple roadmap for you to begin the discussion with your partner so that you can get your money life sorted out. So today I want to talk about just practical things on how we can broach that topic about money. And before we were a couple, we were single, right? So how important is it, and maybe we'll start with you, Donna, how important is it to actually know yourself first regarding money before you actually know your partner about money?
I think because, look, hey, I was 23 when I got married, so I'm still trying to learn myself. But one thing I did know quite quickly is some of the, I guess, the less desirable habits I was perhaps taking into my marriage, perhaps the spending. So I took some time to actually think about, look, do I want to go into my relationship or my marriage with debt? So I tried really hard before we got married to clear that so we could clear the slate and I guess start afresh. So I guess I did take some time when I got married, engaged and understood, hey, I really want to start this relationship on a square foot and make sure that debts are taken care of. And I guess that really led me to having a conversation with my fiance at the time, like, hey, I'm doing this. Perhaps we might talk about some future goals for ourselves. And I think that was a great time for us to think about those things we wanted, I guess, before it was too late. Because if they didn't align, you could be setting yourself up for some really hard discussions in the future. But fortunately, by me just kind of looking at that, I realized, we do align, and there's some alignment there, and we have similar goals. That actually made for a really good start for our marriage and a relationship.
And I guess that alignment makes things easier, but that's not always the case, right? Like some people can be quite different, quite unique. So maybe either one of you could answer this one. Like when you think about yourself and who you are today with respect to money, I guess our history or how we were brought up, how we grew up, is a major impact or has a major bearing on how we behave with money. Do either of you have anything to say about that in terms of any kind of revelations that you've had around just your family and your upbringing and how that's kind of been brought to the fore with your partner?
Yes, we were talking about this on the weekend, actually. I think, Donna is so correct in the fact that you do need to think about it in your own circumstances first, but often it's really hard as an individual to face that head on. I think because our money experiences and how we act today is so shaped by the experiences with our family, particularly, what we've seen our parents or close family around us do in the past as well. I know for my husband and I now, we've been on probably a fairly lengthy money journey in terms of changing how we approach money and our goals together. And most recently on the weekend, we were just sharing with each other a lot for the first time. And we've been together for over 7 years. Really some of our sort of very early experiences of how our family or how we viewed our parents to handle money. And they're conversations that we haven't really had before. And, I force everyone around me to talk about money. So if we struggle to do it, if there are people out there listening or watching, you're not alone in that. It is really challenging. But I think sometimes, particularly, the last year has shown us it is important to try and make that conversation a priority, but come into it understanding that it's hard for everyone. It takes quite a bit of vulnerability to share that information.
Yeah, it does. And I guess the beauty of any relationship is that there is tension. And that sounds odd to say that that's actually a beautiful thing. But when I guess you're approaching any significant decision, if there is 100% alignment, that's great. That makes things easy, but it actually could be really dangerous if you're aligned in the wrong direction, right? Mm-hmm. So I guess I don't know anything at all about your partners, but I know for me and my wife, it's we have different ways of looking at money. And this might be true for a lot of other people where, my partner, she thinks that money is essentially like almost a source of comfort, whereas I look at it more as a tool to get a job done. Do you find that with your significant others that there's similar differences in how you actually perceive what money means?
Yeah, look, I've been married 26 years. It's taken a long time for us to get our money plan right together. And my parents, we didn't talk about money. I made a lot of mistakes because my family did not talk about money. Yet my husband was raised and with, his mum was a principal. He always had money conversations. So there was a certain amount of anxiety that I had around money. And I think that, we had to, I guess, make some really clear goals together, understand each other's personality, because those first few years we really kind of butted head. I guess I was scared to spend money where he was willing to sort of save and invest, and I thought, no, we've got to keep it because I don't know where it's going to come from. For us, we had to actually back up and actually understand together, like, where did you get your money ideas from? What are your money beliefs? Are they serving me now? Are they actually doing me any good? And once I identified some of those anxiety I had about money, that really changed my conversation with my husband. So
that's good. Kat, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with all of Donna's sentiments there. And, one of the things that say for me and my husband, in the way that we reflect about money, is really understanding where each other are coming from and what our values are. Because if you looked at me at face value, I love a spreadsheet, I love planning, it's in my nature, it's what I train to do, and I really like, crunching the numbers and doing all of that. But when you peel back the layers, that really comes from a place of wanting to have certainty, and I really value security and safety. And for me, that is reflected in a money behavior of making sure that we have things like, a well thought through budget and a plan and an emergency account and those sorts of things. Whereas Luke, on the flip side, is just the forever positive person of, money comes in, money goes out, it all works out fine. I'm always thinking that like everything's going to be fine in the end, which, as you can see, has a little bit of tension against someone that actually likes to, be quite certain that we're going to be okay. So really understanding, I suppose, those kind of core values that were driving each of us, and recognizing that it's okay if they're a little bit different, or, if they're in slightly different areas, but being respectful of the fact that what's important to me and what's important to him drives our behavior. And, remembering that when you're talking about money, because otherwise, if you're just coming at it from your two different points of view, it's very easy to butt heads.
If I can add too, one thing, I know I love what you said about, having these different behaviors with money. I think one thing that I did is I'm very much like you. I like that certainty, and I make budgets and lists and plans and goals. And I think a few years ago, we set a goal to save $10,000 in an emergency fund. I don't think my husband was on board with it at first. But once he started seeing that money grow and how quickly it was going, and we were, accessing compounding interest and all those good things, he actually got on board quite quickly, and actually was the one like, hey, how's it going? Hey, look, we've got a bit of extra money. Let's put it into the emergency fund. And, later that year, about 6 months after we got that emergency fund saved into account, his father passed away. And we actually needed to use that emergency fund because we didn't realize the funeral insurance needed a death certificate. We thought it would be payable upon the time. So we actually used that emergency fund to pay for the funeral. Obviously, it was, paid back when the insurance came through. But he, from there on, was a firm believer on my plans and why they can be so important, in a particularly emergency plan. So sometimes I think it's starting it and letting them come for the journey. And luckily enough, my husband thought, I can get on board with this now, and he gets really excited about saving and making financial goals together.
Awesome example of, I guess, how you might have slightly different perceptions around money, slightly different values from where you came from, but by setting a common goal, it kind of acted as a vacuum to suck you into something, which actually, in hindsight, now you realize, or you both realize, that was a really good idea, whereas you're really probably kind of shooting in the dark at the beginning, weren't you?
Mm-hmm, for sure.
That's awesome. So, and I think before we hit record, you were talking a little bit, Donna, about different money personalities, and I use this tool on the Sorted website actually quite a lot with my clients before they come in to see me. I try to insist as much as possible, hey, do this. I want to know what your financial personalities are, because that kind of tells me a lot about how one needs to communicate with them. But I guess maybe a question for you, Kat, because of your background. How critical is it, do you think it is, to actually, before you actually start receiving some guidance, how important is it that you've at least unwrapped these money personalities and figure out who you really are?
Yeah, it's pretty crucial. I think, we had a bit of I shouldn't say a running joke because it's not really a joke, but the running kind of comment in one of the advice firms I worked in Melbourne was that the couples that came in to see us, that very quickly when you're doing sort of a discovery exercise or, meeting with people, it's really easy to see whether people are on the same page or on completely opposite pages. And more often than not, those that came in and were completely on opposite pages and not prepared to go through the discussions to get on the same page around money and values were those that inadvertently we saw split up over the course of the period of time that we worked with them. So it's really, really crucial. I think it can be quite hard for people to have that discussion together sometimes. And that's where, if you are working with a financial advisor or a money coach, it's great to have that discussion with them, because oftentimes they can facilitate you through, the ups and downs or any potential awkward parts of the conversation. we often as well don't know how to ask our significant other about, just saying to them, well, what do you think about money is quite a hard question. And so it's taking that step back and understanding, even before you think about what your goals are, what's important to you? What do I value? How do my values reflect into my goals? And are our goals slightly different because we have very similar values, but, we might have some that are slightly different to each other. So therefore, when you're thinking through about making decisions around money, ultimately you are making a choice to work towards something in the future, and you need to be together with that. You really need to be doing that together. And if you're not, you need to sort of figure out why. And as you said, Donna, having someone buy into the goal that you're working towards is super, super important. So understanding what motivates that other person, really comes to the crux of it, I think.
Okay, so let's talk about conflict a little bit, because if you're in a relationship with somebody else, you may have figured out by now that you're not free from conflict, depending on where you're at in your journey and all the rest of it. But specifically when it comes to money, I guess it's probably pretty important to at least attempt to, or ideally try to create a conflict-free zone if you can. That should be what we work towards, because an old proverb says, how can two walk together unless they be agreed? So getting into agreement about anything is more important than anything else before you walk towards anything. So I know with my wife and I, one of the best things that we probably ever did was we set up our bank accounts, and we built a joint accounts, but also separate accounts. So do you want to just take us through maybe a couple of things practically that people can do to, I guess, set up structures around them to create a conflict-free financial system? Donna, do you want to maybe go first with this one?
Sure. So what is a couple of the tips that really work for me is we go out for breakfast once a month, and we take our spreadsheets with us in our budget, and we have a chat about what's coming up, what some of our goals are, we still on track, do we need to pull in, which is most often the case, we pulling back a bit. But that's really helpful, because we always leave that breakfast, we have a nice breakfast in a cafe, and we feel renewed with our goals. One thing, because we did have conflict, as I said, coming from different places, even though we had similar goals, just the way we got to those goals, we wanted to do it differently. And one thing we decided very clearly early on was that we will use our listening skills when the other is talking. So listening skills, and when you listen without an agenda to the other person, so that my husband could be talking about his goal to buy a boat, and I'm thinking that's not going to happen. But if I actually take away any of my thoughts and just listen and understand why, I actually find we're a lot more productive. I feel we're a lot more productive, because we are taking away any emotion. We're actually seeing them for what the things that they want to achieve. Because my biggest goal is I want to have a secure retirement. That's probably one of the biggest goals I have. I'm thinking about my retirement. I'm 45 and I'm thinking about my retirement every day. That's not what he's thinking about. So we're conflict. We just have to decide what we're really good at and take ownership of it. And we do that in our budget really well. So there's some things he does really well and other things that I do really well. And we quite comfortably take that on. So I think
that's
was
awesome.
All.
No, that's all good. And Kat, did you have anything to add around that?
Yeah. I was just laughing because I'm like, my husband also is just thinking about boats constantly. So, it must be a Kiwi thing. I do. I think so. 2 points kind of come to mind. The first is know when to get help. So know when the two of you possibly are struggling, or even if you're not, and you just want a bit of a leg up, know when to bring someone else into that to help you. So as an example, very early on in our relationship, actually, Luke and I both went and saw a financial advisor, and we both saw the same financial advisor. But at that point in time, we didn't have merged finances, and we didn't really know how to go through the process of that. And, also relatively early days, you're not really sure where this is going, but we both knew that we were serious enough to get our finances on track independently. And then within about 12 months of us working with her separately, she was the one that turned around at one point and said to us, okay, you're both coming into these meetings with me and talking about the same goals. So you're working towards the exact same thing, but you're doing it in 2 independent meetings. I think you guys should maybe think about coming in together. And that was sort of what started us on this journey of, having merged finances and figuring out that sort of process and how we fit it in together. We still use her. So we still use her on a regular basis to have financial check-ins, and she's really good at making sure that we're staying focused on what our longer term goals are, not getting too bogged down in the detail, which I like to do sometimes, and also as well has just been a really good, I suppose, third party that's totally independent to essentially mediate some discussions where we've come at things with very, very different views, and although we've tried to kind of work through them ourselves, we've found it quite challenging. And then having someone, I suppose, give a third party view and a little bit more independent thought has really helped. So that would be my first one. The second one would be, and I've also just done a complete mind blank on this, would be, so thinking about the division of labor. So this is a little bit of a strange one, but I think in my experience, although many people are, as a couple, often on the same page together, there's usually one person that will do sort of the financial legwork in terms of that day-to-day stuff. So like what you talked about, Darcy, in terms of, setting up your bank structures or running the budget spreadsheet, sounds like that's Donna and me, those sorts of things. So just being a little bit conscious around making sure that you're both involved in some of the day-to-day legwork, but also playing to your own strengths. So I know that if I handed over the spreadsheet to Luke, he would just look at it once a month and probably never again after about 4 months. And that would really annoy me. Whereas he's very good at doing other parts of our financial world. I also do have, and I'm sure she won't mind me sharing, my sister-in-law recently, her and her husband had for a very long time very defined, I suppose, sort of roles in terms of who did what in their finances. And they felt that to kind of get back on the same page after a number of years of marriage, they should totally switch. So he used to do the budgeting and paying the bills and all different things, and she had sort of taken a bit of a step back from that for quite a while. And so at the start of last year, they decided that they would change financial roles entirely in their house, and she would become the family CFO for a while, just to, I think, have a bit more of an appreciation of the additional workload and burden that sometimes it puts on people in particularly if they have a family or in a couple. So being aware of that and making sure that, if you do need your partner to pick up a bit of slack, let them know.
That's awesome tip. I love that whole concept of division of labor or specialization. Stick to what you do well and then outsource the rest. And then every now and then swap it up around, because you don't know, right? There's only 2 of you. You don't know really if one person is more competent in one area than the other. And it's probably really important in terms of that whole equality piece, just making sure that everybody kind of feels the weight of everything equally.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Now,
sense check yourself, right? Because I think when they went through that experience, you kind of question the status quo a little bit, which sometimes you need to do in your finances, whether it's through, where as a family you're spending on particular areas, or just having someone else cross-check what you're doing. So
yeah,
they found that really invaluable.
Love it.
Awesome. And I want to go back to what you said before as well, Donna, around how important it is to actually listen to what the other person is saying. And to all the people out there who have partners that want to get a boat, listen to them. Come on, listen to them. They just need to go fishing. But putting that aside, let's just say that the listening part is really good, but maybe there's a problem with the talking. So let's talk about some of the sources of conflict. So let's say that you do want to talk about money. You're ready to get serious, but your partner isn't quite there yet. So how could some sort of deal with this common objection where they have a partner who actually is unwilling to talk about money? Does anybody have anything to say about that?
I know one thing that because I teach hundreds of classes across New Zealand with financial capability, and one of the things that I get them to do is if they have this problem, I get them to write and rehearse the conversation. So they kind of come up with some ideas of like, no, he's going to say that. Well, write that down. Now let's think of a response you can think and try to keep it positive. So yeah, really rehearsing the conversation. I've certainly done that, and I'm sure my husband did that when he brought up the boat goal. I'm pretty sure it sounded pretty rehearsed to me, but
we all
yeah,
have
yeah.
that rehearsed conversation. Trust me, Donna.
Yeah. So rehearsing it, if you know it's going to be a bit challenging and there might be conflict, just reminding of some of the things that are important to you, some of the values that you think are important, and but also I guess try to understand where they're coming from, maybe even try to explore. So, if you don't want to have this conversation, is there something that's holding you back? Is there something from your past that you think that might be, you have anxiety about money? And, rehearsing these conversations can be really, I think, helpful for you to uncover those potential conflicts that are going to come in, and hopefully you end up on a good note. It doesn't always happen, but I guess it's a tip that may be helpful.
I think in line with the rehearsing what you're planning to say, I think is recognizing that sometimes understanding whether written or speaking vocab is easier for you to do. So I know for me personally, I write a lot more eloquently than I often talk. And I find that when I need to talk about something that is perhaps a little bit nerve-wracking for me, or is quite a serious matter. So there have been instances in the past where I've written things down to show my husband, just so that I really clearly get my key points across, and don't fluff in the time or kind of panic, or talking to him about it and then I see his facial expression and change my mind, that sort of thing. So if you need to write something down or write a letter to someone and say, hey, here's my key thoughts, can you go and think about that and then let's talk about it, can often be quite helpful. So yeah, that would be my tip.
That's really good.
And sending a sweet invite, it doesn't have to be sweet, but I actually invite my husband to our, budget meetings or those conversations. So rather than late at night when you're lying in bed, hey, I'd really like to talk about our financial goals, we know that it's not going to work. So making sure it's the right time, the right place, you've set it up. Maybe if it's suitable, set some snacks up. We're really trying to, I guess, set that platform so that the other person is going to feel comfortable, knows this is actually important to you. If you've gone to the time to invite them, make it the setting, really enjoyable for them, hopefully they get a glimpse of, this is actually really important to you, isn't it? Okay, I'm willing to sit here and listen.
That's awesome. So now let's talk about, let's assume that you can listen, you can talk now about money, but then life goes on and changes happen. Maybe you have children, or there's an unexpected drop in income where maybe one person becomes a primary caregiver, one person becomes the primary earner, and there is a financial imbalance that occurs in terms of the source of income, whoever's deriving it. And that changes dynamics significantly in a relationship, and all the more reason why you should get the platform right to begin with. But let's say that someone hasn't yet got the platform right, and then children come along, for example, and income drops in half, and there's going to be potentially some tension there. So how does that actually work in reality? What are some of the conflict points when this happens, when there's an imbalance in who brings in the income?
That is a really good one, Darcy. One thing that came to mind when you were talking about this is my sister-in-law runs a business that deals with new families. And in a lot of the research that they've done of their customers, they found that there is a huge amount of guilt that's harbored by the non-working spouse in these circumstances, because typically they are the person that is spending the money. So if you think about a family dynamic, often the person that is non-working or the main child caregiver is also the person that's doing the grocery shopping, buying clothes for the kids, spending the money, but they're not earning the money. And that for a lot of people came across as something that they felt very guilty about, and also didn't really know how to talk about with their partner or their husband or spouse. So I think having an awareness of that for both people pre-kids, or even if you do have kids now, is really, really important. I think, as Donna said, setting up, if you have the behaviors to kind of have those financial check-ins now, and, diarising time to set aside, it's even more important to do that as your life gets busier, and just really trying to stick with that, because, you'll find yourself many years down the track and it might have veered off into a direction that you didn't really plan.
That's right.
We had 4 children within a relatively short, I think within 5 years we had 4 children. We had twins, so we kind of, our plans for 3 kids 2 years apart. And I obviously knew that I was going to be at home looking after the kids. So we decided, well, I sort of took on a role like, this are the things that I can control. So look, I'm going to take the kids out during the week, and we're going to go to the park, and we're going to get a tub of ice cream with some spoons. So $20, that's going to be my fun budget. And I guess those little things helped my husband understand that, look, I'm aware of that the finances are a bit I guess limited these days, but I still wanted to factor in a bit of fun. I didn't want to take away all those things. And we, some of our kids' fondest memories are of those really kind of cheap dates kinds of things, but the kids hadn't realized we actually budgeted those things in. And again, we were on the same path. We understood it. We went into having children knowing that my income would be dropped. But some of our best memories are of, spending $20 at the park or doing things like that. So, yeah, again, it's having a conversation, knowing what's important. And, I identified my role in the budget as a mother. So what does it cost? What are the things that I need to do? And what was really, really important that my husband allowed me to do, he gave me $50 a week for me. That was it unanswered. He goes, I don't care what you do with it. You can blow it on getting your hair done or save it up. That is yours, and don't feel guilty about it. I don't even need to know what you're going to do with it. I think that was my real sanity. That was my sanity money, because I could save it up. I could get some shoes, and it was actually a really, really powerful message that he sent to me. Like, it's okay for you to be at home at this time. We'll make it work, but you're still really important to me as well. So here's some money. Yeah.
That's really good. Really good. And we've used that word budget a few times. I hate using the word budget, but it has to be used sometimes. And if people don't like the word budget, you could use the word template if you like. But I guess that's really important, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to actually allocate money towards something that is important, like having enjoyment of life and having something to spend on the kids. Each to their means, right? Like every household is going to be different in terms of their capability, but everybody can actually plan. Everybody can actually purposefully set aside some portion of money. But I totally get that. Like what you were saying, Kat, as well, with my wife, it's the same story, because she's the primary caregiver. She often feels like guilty. Yeah, totally guilty about spending money, because she had to spend a lot on groceries last week, for example, or she needed to get the kids new shoes, whatever that was. Yeah, there is that sense that if she's not earning it, she naturally will feel guilty for spending something that she didn't do. But I think that a lot of it seems to be resolved. I know in our household anyway, seems to be resolved when I'm communicating really well with her in terms of how our finances are tracking. So going back to what you were saying, Donna, having those regular check-ins where you're actually talking about the state of play as it stands right now. Super important. Like for me, especially, my income up and down like a yo-yo. And so sometimes there's a lot more capability than other times. That creates another dynamic. So any self-employed people know what this is like. And it's so important to be constantly communicating to your partner around that sort of thing, because again, it's just avoiding potential catastrophes later on when the credit card bill goes through the roof, right?
Yeah. I think you're so right on that, Darcy, because was reflecting on, any of the times that Luke and I have run into trouble with each other on the budget is just when we haven't communicated why what seems to be an arbitrary number has been set for something. And that's usually, one of us just hasn't communicated with the other one very well as to why we're trying to work towards, not spending in a certain area or only spending so much. And then once, that other person understands what's going on, there's never any issue. And it's not that, you're trying to necessarily restrict everyone's fun or have a budget for the sake of a budget, because let's be honest, no one really likes budgets. But it's definitely about that communication.
That's cool. And it's kind of like, I guess it's like anything, right? Like when we look to the government, perhaps to fund certain things, and why aren't they doing that? The money has to come from somewhere, right? Yep. And so, yes, we do need freedom to spend it. We need to have some clear understanding there. But at the same time, we need to have an understanding of where the money is coming from and how that works. And so again, it's really important if there's an earner and a non-earner in a household, you're still working, but the earning bit isn't aligned to the effort being exerted in the household. So that communication, I think, or even over communication for some people might feel like that's actually really important, isn't it? Let's move on to other potential sources of conflict, because it's and we're never going to be able to cover it all in today's session, but I just want to talk about what happens in some situations where maybe the money chat hasn't happened, that foundation hasn't been laid yet. And I don't know where you are in your relationship. Maybe you've already had kids and you're quite far down the track and you're getting ready for retirement. But let's say that you've identified that maybe your partner doesn't see money the same way you do, and they aren't taking it as seriously as you think they should. Maybe their spending is out of control. What are some practical things that we can do to kind of bring up that conversation and actually broach the topic with our partner around out of control spending?
So some of the workshops that I run, in one particular one, I invite the normally there's a participant, but I invite them to bring their other significant other. And what I also request them to bring is their bank statements. And so we sort of highlight how many times have you been to the supermarket this month, and like, wow, we've been 36 times and there's only 30 days in a month. And they're doing this together, and one person sitting there going, I already knew this. But sometimes the other person's like, oh, I'm actually seeing this for the first time. Hey, they may not change, but at least I guess getting an awareness in their own way, like without perhaps the other person having to tell them, because I don't like being told what to do, but maybe uncovering it for themselves. And so we actually find in those particular workshops, the partner's like, hey, wow, I didn't realize this is why we have nothing left at the end of the week. What are we doing spending $80 on coffee each week or each month? That's crazy. We should bring our own coffees to work. That's one of the tools that I use for those couples. Look, I've had one woman who was in her 60s who was coming to do one of my money management workshops, and she said she was there because she had allowed her husband, well, not allowed, she just didn't take an interest in the finances. And when they got divorced, which was an unfortunate situation for her, she didn't even know how to pay the power bill. She didn't even know the bank account numbers. She just had no idea. And she really felt like, what was I doing? Why didn't I have these conversations earlier? So, I think the sooner we can have couples talking, I think we've got to employ all those methods. Yeah, I think helping them understand it and see it for themselves. And I know seeing the bank statements can help them understand, exactly where their money's going, and potentially make them change some of those behaviors.
That's cool. I guess you could also probably pull up the old COVID tracer app and just have a look at where they've been. I haven't tried that yet, but now I'm scared that my wife's going to do it on me. But that's probably good. Bank statements, the COVID tracer app, having a conversation with a third party. Kat, do you have anything to add to that?
Just that the bank statement example is exactly what Luke and I did when we first started. And that was something that was driven by our advisor, particularly for him. So I knew fairly well what was going on with my spending, and he had a very good job in Melbourne, very high paid, just lived in a share house with all of his mates, and, money in, money out, not going to have to worry about it. And it wasn't until he actually physically printed 6 months of bank statements and took them to work one day, because he had a fair bit of downtime, and went through and highlighted every single expenditure item that was discretionary. And it was only through that exercise did he realize that in that year he spent more money than his net income by an amount of $10,000. So for anyone, simple maths, $10,000 in debt basically at the end of the year, which was an example, or basically gave him the understanding to realize, why he had a credit card and why he had a personal loan. And until that happened, he just didn't think about it. I think the key there for me is that I wasn't involved with that. It was really something that he had to have that discussion with a third party. And as Donna says, finding, a facilitator or a course that can help you do that. My other comment would be, if you're really, really struggling to get onto the same page, or just having a really challenging discussion, there are always steps that you can make for yourself to try and secure your own financial future. If your partner's not going to get on board, and that's not to say that you need to start squirreling money away in your own bank account. But just making some tweaks to your budget, or just the way that I think your pays are potentially paid into certain bank accounts, and thinking about investing. I do know for us as well, when we both started investing, that really changed Luke's mindset around how he viewed money, because money in an investment account, or say your KiwiSaver, is very different to money in a bank account. And so it was just this real sort of mindset shift around thinking about, money in a bank account. Great, there's going to be more of that there in a fortnight, so I can take that out and go and buy this thing. Whereas money in our investment account, that's for our future. There's quite a few steps I have to go through to get that money out to spend it. And having those, I suppose, pauses or stops, and bit of a gate or a hurdle to get through, really helped to force us to continue to save.
I love that.
I love it too.
That's good, because I guess what you're doing is and you can take it even the next level and set up your bank accounts so that they're automated, and then maybe you have a joint account, 2 separate accounts, but then you have your savings account, your buffer account, and your investment account. Withdrawals of any certain amount, you have to have a discussion with your partner to talk about what that purpose is. There's all sorts of rules and systems that you can put in place and I'm saying that, I guess, because I'm speaking to those that really hate budgets again, or even hate that word budgeting. Sometimes systems and structures can accomplish the same things, right?
Yeah, I think on that, Darcy, like one of the real simple things that we even do now is we have one main joint account that's for all of our bills and our rates and, grocery spending. And when we were setting that up at the bank, we actually actively chose to just have one card associated with that. So we purposefully don't have it in either of our wallets, because it's sort of our house card, and it's basically lives at home, and whoever's doing the grocery shopping takes that card, or is, filling up the car with petrol takes that card. But then it just means that the amount that is sort of, making sure that we're covering all of our expenditure in terms of bills is always there, and it's very distinct to our our fun money, as we call it.
Yeah,
which is in different bank accounts.
That's cool. Awesome. So let's just finish up now and talk about some of the things that you can focus on that are positives. Like we've talked a little bit about some of the negatives in terms of conflict and coming from a different family background, having different money personalities that creates conflict, or not even having that money conversation at the start that creates issues later on. But in terms of some positive things to really focus on, because I think there's probably a lot more power in focusing on the positive rather than trying to avoid the negative. So if we're looking at maybe some goals, whether it be buying tomorrow's home at today's price, thinking about buying the future home for you to live in, whether it be about taking care of your retirement, like what you mentioned, Donna, that's really important to you, or whether it be about saving towards a goal like buying a boat, which is important for every male in the world. How important is it that you have some common goals to work towards?
Yeah, look, hey, at first, my husband and I, our goals were not common. It was clear that we had different ideas of what goals should be, and I think it really came down to he's a very detailed person and I'm a big picture person. So once we understood that, like I'd have the big dream and he'd sort of nut it down. So we realized those reflected in our goals as well. But, for some of the couples that I work with, some of those really small goals that can sort of start them thinking about, how do they have these discussions is, what's your credit rating? Here's a free website that you go and find it out together, and then, maybe share in it that how valuable is that to you? What does it mean to you? Some of the little chores that I give couples to do is like, what's your KiwiSaver account? What kind of portfolio is in it? Do you know what the difference between a sort of defensive or growth or aggressive? And it kind of sends them off doing homework together. And I've found that couples really get on board together when they're setting those little mini goals, like, all right, my first goal is I'm going to find out what my credit score is, and I'm going to share that with my wife. Or my second goal is I'm going to take a look at my KiwiSaver account, and I'm going to have my wife to find out which KiwiSaver it is, because I don't even know who I'm banking with my KiwiSaver. So yeah, some of those, I guess, little goals that I find really helpful for the people that I work with. And keeping in mind, some of the people that I work with come in with very, very little financial capability. I mean, we're a bit of a long way from even getting to talk to advisors. They're still having issues with debt. So I find that the smaller goals that build up to the big goals like home ownership, I find the mini goals really help them to understand it. And once they succeed in one small mini goal, it just seems to have that drive to want to get to that big one, which might be buy their home in 5 years' time.
And that's so important, that you do set those realistic, achievable goals to start with, because you're going to get so much more confident in achieving the next goal, specifically around debt repayment. Kat, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think you've just touched on a great point there, Darcy, because one of the things that I find incredibly common, particularly amongst some of the, accumulator younger clients that I've worked with, is everyone is super ambitious. And I think goals is always the funnest place to start when, you're talking about going on a money journey together, or thinking about what you want your future to look like. And oftentimes we would encourage people to think really big and think, in 25 years, like paint us a picture of what are you doing? Where are you living? How are you both working? Do you have family? What does your family live nearby? How does that all work together? And then from that big picture kind of view, take some steps back and really start to break down how you might get there in terms of some stepping stone goals. One thing I would caution people on is that oftentimes as an advisor, we would find that people would come to us with all of these really exciting things that they want to work towards, but they'd want them all in 5 years. And our job was always to, encourage them, but rein it in a little bit and really talk through how to compromise on things. And I think that's where it can be really helpful to work with, a money coach or a financial advisor as a couple, because you do have to make an element of compromise. Everyone has to. And it's really figuring out what's important to each of you and what you're willing to compromise on. So, can your first home be in 7 years rather than 5 years? Or could you, delay starting a family for a year so you can save up a bit extra into your emergency account, and, therefore it's a bit easier for someone to take time off work? All those sorts of things. I think for a lot of people, that's like the exciting part, but then also having some smaller goals along the way so that you have that achievement recognition. Because I do know, particularly speaking from experience, that if you're a type A or driven kind of personality, you really need to be reminded of what you've achieved and make sure that you really, reference that and celebrate from where you've come from. So thinking about, say, for Luke and I, 7 years ago, we didn't even have a joint bank account, had absolutely no goals together that we were working towards, versus where we are today is very, very different. And we do need to sort of forcibly stop ourselves sometimes and really appreciate that and make sure that, we give ourselves a pat on the back and maybe go out for a wine and really enjoy that, because it's hard, and it's really good if you are doing that.
Well, really well said. Thank you. It doesn't really matter. I guess this is for everybody, right? Like, it doesn't really matter what your platform is, what your starting point is. What does matter is the direction that we're heading into, because again, as long as we're aligned, we're together, we're working towards that goal, good things will probably happen in the way. Yep, you might change the direction every now and then, but it's so important just to have a direction, full stop, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Donna, very much. Thank you, Kat, very much. And until next time, enjoy your day.